Travel photography is a multidisciplinary genre that has you doing a little bit of everything. You might be shooting landscapes 1 minute, and then street photography and candid environmental portraits the next, followed by some architectural photography. And so that means that both you and your Nikon Z camera have to be ready for all of it. So in this video, I'm going to take you through my recommended travel photography settings for Nikon Z cameras. And again, these are just my recommendations based on how I shoot and what I think are important for travel photography. And I'm going to give you the reasons why I think these settings are important to set the way I do in the context specifically of travel photography and having to shoot a little bit of everything. I'm also going to go through settings that are available in all Nikon Z cameras, which means that your camera may not have some of the settings that I mention here. So take this with a grain of salt. It's a good place to start. Take some of the pieces that you like, change some of the other pieces, and you can completely ignore the rest. But I hope this video gets you set up so that you can get some great photos on your next trip. We are going to start in the photo shooting menu in Role Played by Card in Slot 2, or some cameras you may see this called the secondary slot function. If your camera has 2 card slots, I'd really recommend setting this to the backup option. And that means that your memory cards are going to be duplicates of one another. If anything should happen to one of them, like a card fails, which is very rare, but more commonly, you may lose a memory card, especially if you're taking it out of your camera to back it up. Something might happen to it. All of your precious travel photos will still exist on that other card. You should be carrying multiple memory cards with you when you travel just to have spares. So, storage space, a la the overflow option, this shouldn't really be an issue for you. That backup option, I think, is more important. There are a few different aspect ratio options under image area. You can do fun things like recording a square image format or a letterbox image format. And while those may be fun if you do a certain style or you have a specific photo challenge that you're working on, when you're traveling, I'd recommend just setting this to the normal aspect ratio, the FX if you have a full frame camera, or the DX format if you have a crop sensor camera, and then crop into those different aspect ratios, either a 4:5 or a 1:1, later on if you need to. Just record all of those pixels now just so you have them. And then in image quality, I do like to set this to RAW plus the highest quality JPEG file, whatever that might be and whatever camera you're using, either fine or fine with the star, because I do like to share my photos while I'm traveling. And so I have those JPEG files that I can just quickly transfer over to my phone and share them if I want to. But then I have those RAW files as the archival file that I can later process when I get home to really fine tune them. If you have no desire to process your RAW photos, and there's nothing wrong with that at all, you don't have to record in RAW if you don't want to, then set it to the highest quality JPEG file that you can. The image size settings will apply to your JPEG file if you're recording that. If you're only recording RAW, this won't be applicable, but medium here is going to be plenty big. You can still print a 12-inch by 18-inch photo with no issues using that medium size, and it's going to use up less storage than the large. If all you're going to be doing is sharing these photos with family and friends, and even just posting them to social media, small may still be more than enough for this purpose, and that's going to save even more storage on your memory card. If you do have a full frame camera, I'd recommend enabling DX image sizes with the large size to account for the crop when using a DX lens on a full frame camera, if that's what you're doing. If you are recording the RAW file format, there's a reason for doing that. You want all of the raw data available to you, so I'd recommend choosing lossless compression for the RAW recording format. The high efficiency options will discard some of that data. Now let's talk about the ISO sensitivity settings. I'd really encourage you to take advantage of auto ISO. It's really a godsend for travel photography because it's one less thing to think about while also ensuring a fast enough shutter speed to help you get sharper photos. So in this menu, you can enable auto ISO and set the ISO sensitivity setting to 100. That's going to be your default low ISO. And then for the maximum sensitivity, I like to set 6400. I trust the camera to go up to that ISO sensitivity value if it needs to. And I don't have a problem with higher ISOs. I'd much rather have a sharper photo than a clean photo, which is another soapbox that I won't get on here. But just give the camera permission to operate at these higher ISOs if it really needs that amplification. And then the minimum shutter speed, this is a tricky one. For travel photography, where you are doing all of this multidisciplinary photography, I think 1/200th of a second is a pretty good compromise. It's going to be fast enough to freeze most scenes, but also not excessively fast that you're going to end up with unnecessarily high ISOs. If you're only photographing still life, like landscapes or architectural photography, you can get away with slower shutter speeds. So here, instead, you might want to set auto, which is going to base your shutter speed on the lens focal length. Set it to auto if you have a stabilized lens or camera body, or auto +1 if you don't have that kind of stabilization. For white balance, I usually just leave it in the auto 1 option. That works great in most situations, so you don't have to keep changing it. Color space will only apply to your in-camera JPEGs, and if you are recording those in-camera JPEGs, set this to sRGB. sRGB is going to ensure compatibility and more consistent colors across all display devices where you might be sharing those photos. For the metering mode, Matrix just can't be beat in dynamic situations that travel photography throws at us. Matrix will give you consistent exposures across a variety of scenes and without much thought on your part. We're, again, just really trying to simplify things. Now, for the release mode, which is how many photos the camera will take when you hold the shutter button down, I prefer L, the low speed burst. And that's because when I'm doing travel photography, I could be photographing a landscape 1 minute or people on the street the next minute. The low speed burst option is slow enough where I can create one single photo during those landscapes. I just tap the shutter button and create that one photo. But as soon as I turn to like street photography or there's some kind of animal in the frame, the low speed burst option is fast enough to give me choices in that burst. When I hold the shutter button down, I will have more photos to choose from when there is that kind of movement happening in the frame. What you choose for the focus mode might take some thought on your part. If your camera has the AFA option, the auto switching option, like many of the consumer cameras do, just set it to AFA and leave it there. It'll respond to the scene as appropriate. But if your camera does not have that, you're going to have to choose between single shot autofocus or continuous autofocus. If you do know that you will only be photographing still life, then set it to AFS. But continuous autofocus, that is a must when you're photographing things that are either moving towards or away from you, and it gives you additional focus modes. So if you are anticipating any of this kind of movement, and you just want one setting to hang your hat on, leave it on AFC. Otherwise, it is really easy to change between AFS and AFC using the I menu or a custom control. The AF area mode is also going to require some thought and changing around in response to what you're shooting. But if you just had to choose one, I'd recommend the small, wide autofocus point. This is small enough to be fairly selective, but also large enough so you don't need to struggle placing it on a small point. It's also the smallest area in which subject detection is available. But again, you're likely going to need to be changing these, and you can do that in the I menu or with a custom control. As far as the autofocus and or manual focus subject detection options, auto works great if you're photographing a variety of subjects. Otherwise, set it to people when you are selectively photographing people, and then off when you are not photographing any of these subject types because it can erroneously detect a subject that is not there, and that can throw off your focus. The vibration reduction setting is best set to normal when you're doing general travel photography. You should only choose sport when you're going to be panning, tracking something that is moving. And then as you transition into night and you might be doing long exposures on a tripod, I'd recommend turning this off because that vibration reduction system can actually introduce movement during long exposures. We're not going to go into any of the video recording settings here, but if you do want to see what my recommended video settings are for travel photography, you can read that in the article that will be linked in this video. So let's go to the custom settings menu next, starting in the A subgroup for focus or autofocus, and go to the focus points used option. When things are moving fast, I prefer alternating or one half to give you faster focus point selection. It doesn't give you the accuracy of being able to use every single focus point available, but you're likely not doing macro or locked down on a tripod that you can't move. So the availability of having every single one of those focus points is less important. I'd rather be able to move them faster than have all of them there. And that's why I think that trade off is a better idea. Store points by orientation is a really useful feature if you set it to focus point and AF area mode. With this set, you could, for example, set it to single point in the lower third of the screen for a horizontal or landscape orientation photo, and then have the wide, small area in the upper third in the vertical orientation with the hand grip on the top, and then single point in the upper third in the vertical orientation with the hand grip on the bottom, or whatever focus points and positions you want to use. It just gives you a lot of flexibility for having different autofocus area modes and positions based on your camera orientation. That extra flexibility is a great thing to have in travel photography. And then for AF activation, this sets whether or not the shutter button is used to command autofocus. I love using the back button focus technique in travel photography so that I'm not required to use autofocus for every single photo via the shutter button half press, meaning that only the back autofocus button, either the AF on button or AEL AFL, that's the only thing that's used to focus. The shutter button is only there to take the picture. So that's why I set this to AF on only. If you want to learn more about this back button focus technique, you can watch that in a video that I will have linked here. The limit AF area mode selection option is a really valuable feature to take advantage of. This gives you faster selection of the autofocus area modes that you do use by disabling the ones that you don't use. So when you're selecting the autofocus area mode via a custom control or in the I menu with the command dial, it only cycles through the modes that you have enabled. And when things are happening fast in travel photography, this gives you a much quicker selection of your desired AF area mode. For example, I have disabled pinpoint, the small and large dynamic area options, and the custom 1 and custom 2 wide area modes. Now I don't have to cycle through those when I'm trying to get to the mode that I want. The built-in AF illuminator is the little lamp on the front of the camera that comes on in dark scenes to help your autofocus system. And as far as travel photography is concerned, I think it's better to turn this off. It does have a limited useful range, and it can surprise or blind people that you might be doing candid photos of. So we don't want to be shining that light in their face if they're not expecting it. Now going into the B group in the custom settings menu, you may want to turn on easy exposure compensation so that you can rotate the command dials to change your exposure compensation faster. You don't have to find and hold down that little tiny exposure compensation button to change that. It can just make life easier for you. but be aware that your exposure compensation could accidentally change if you bump the command dials because it removes that lock of having to hold down that exposure compensation button. Now let's go down to the D group. I think it's a good idea to turn on extended shutter speeds. This is just to enable long exposures in manual exposure mode. If this is off, you're going to be limited to 90-second exposures. And you may want to do some long exposures at night, so this will need to be on. Now we'll go to apply settings to live view or view mode. You're going to want to see what your exposure variables and other picture control settings are going to do to your photo. So set this to either on or show effects of settings. That's just going to depend on your camera model because otherwise your viewfinder is going to look more like a traditional DSLR. You're not going to be able to preview your exposure settings, and I think that's one of the main advantages of having a mirrorless camera. Going into the F group for Touch FN, I love using the viewfinder for travel photography. It really lets me remove all of the distractions happening around me so I can just focus on my framing, no pun intended. And when I'm doing that, I love using my thumb on the LCD to move my focus point around the screen. And so this is where you configure that. You enable Touch FN and then assign Touch FN to move focus point. And then in the Touch FN area, you enable the part of the touchscreen that you want to use to move that focus point. I have the right half for the wide orientation and the entire screen for the tall orientation. Now, when you're looking through that viewfinder, you can use your thumb to drag the focus point to where you want it. Let's take a quick look at one setting in the playback menu, and that's image review or picture review. I personally think it's best to turn this off because if it's on, that last image that you took is automatically going to show up on the LCD. And while that sounds nice, it's a huge distraction. And I know a lot of photographers have missed many an opportunity because of that automatic image review. They were just so busy looking at that auto playback that they missed what was happening in front of them. So keep this off, capture the moment, and then review your images when you're ready to using the play button. Going into the setup menu and format, you want to make sure that your cards are clean and ready to go before any big trip. So format them, prepare them by wiping the card clean, ensuring that file structure is set up to properly record those images, and just make sure that you have any other pictures on that card backed up somewhere else before you format. If you have the quick or full format options, do a full format here. The Save User Settings option is available in most Nikon Z cameras that have a mode dial. This is a very valuable feature to take advantage of, so you can further refine these settings into different subgenres. Like we said, travel photography is multidisciplinary, so you may want sub-settings for certain things like landscapes or wildlife, and this is where you can set those up. Now, I did another video about how to come up with your custom user settings and how to program them in the camera, and I will link to that video that you can watch here to see more about doing that. Be sure that whenever you get to your destination, you adjust the time zone. Don't forget to change it when you get back home. If you are connected via the SnapBridge smartphone app, this will happen automatically for you. When you're traveling, battery life is a very important consideration because you won't always be somewhere where you can charge your battery. And the camera displays are one thing that can use a lot of battery power, especially the brightness settings. So when it comes to the brightness, just leave the monitor at 0. And if you're in really dark environments, you can further turn that down to save the battery power, and then set the viewfinder at auto. The auto rotate info display, you'll want to make sure that that is on so that your camera symbology rotates with the camera and is easier to read
when you rotate the camera. I'd recommend setting Save Focus Position on, which will save your focus distance when the camera power is cycled. Otherwise, it's going to be reset to infinity, which could slow you down a little every time you turn the camera back on. If you're changing lenses a lot, there's a chance that some dirt could get into the camera body and attach itself to your sensor. So, most cameras do have a clean image sensor option, and you can set this to automatic cleaning, clean at shutdown, and that's going to vibrate the sensor every time that power is cycled to shake off any loose materials that might be on it. If something is really stuck to that sensor, you can watch another video that I did all about how to clean that camera sensor. In the copyright info option, make sure that you set the artist and the copyright to your name so that they are attached to every image that you create. That's always just good practice. When you're traveling, you might be wandering into churches or museums or creating discrete, candid photos on the street. And you probably don't want your camera making every single possible sound that it can make in these situations. So when the beep options or camera sounds, set these off. And if you have an electronic shutter option, you can set a synthetic sound and volume for the electronic shutter. If you need it, set it to the lowest practical, useful volume. I'd still recommend keeping it off, but if you do want that kind of feedback, just set it to the lowest volume possible. Many cameras also have a silent mode option, and enabling that will also disable all sounds, but it will also automatically enable the electronic shutter. This can be useful if you need to be absolutely stealthy, but just be aware that there are some limitations to the electronic shutter. You can read about those in an article that I'll have linked here. So I would recommend just keeping it off unless absolutely needed. I'd also recommend taking a look at the Connect to Smart Device submenu. That's at the end of the setup menu in older Nikon Z cameras. Newer cameras, it has its own network menu. But in Connect to Smart Device, configure your camera to use the Nikon SnapBridge app on your smartphone, and that gives you automatic time and date updates as you're traveling. It can also add geolocation information so you know where each one of your photos was created, and you can also transfer photos from your camera to your smartphone. Just follow the on-screen instructions for pairing that here. And that takes us through nearly all of the menus, but the last thing that I want to mention here is taking advantage of custom menus. We went through a lot of options and we jumped around to a lot of different menus. They're just kind of scattered all over the place. Some of these settings you may want to have very quick access to. And so you can create your own custom menu and put these settings that you use a lot into one single menu page. You don't have to endlessly scroll through all of those menus to find an item that you change a lot. Just put it all in one place. If you want step-by-step instructions about how to create your own custom My menu and also how to customize the I menu, you can read that in an article that I will have linked here. So that'll get you set up for your next trip to start creating some memorable travel photos. If you want to understand more about how all of these settings work, the different exposure and focus options and customization options, you can learn more about that in my Nikon Z Photography Fundamentals course, which you'll find linked here on the screen, and you can take 20% off of that course with the code TUBE20. If you have anything else to add, any other questions, any settings I missed that you think are important specifically to travel photography, please let us know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe for more great tips like this every week, and I'll see you in the next video.